this is part 1 of the 2-part series demo. In this one we create a public subnet, and then we create launch a compute instance in there, install a web server on it, and then communicate to the web using an internet gateway. So pretty straightforward demo. Hopefully it would give you a sense of how things work with the OCI virtual cloud network service. So let me jump to the console. And until now we have created a couple of networks within OCI in the US East region. So we're still in the US East region. Let me create another network as per the slide I had. So it's a demo VCN, and I would choose a CIDR block of 10.0.0.0/16 as it was on the slide. Remaining parameters I'm not changing, and I create a virtual cloud network. Now I just created a VCN. There is no subnet, there are no internet gateways, etc. Right? So first thing I need to do is create a subnet. So let me go ahead, create a subnet, call it subnet A as it was on the slide. For the CIDR notation, for the CIDR block, I'm going to choose a smaller block out of that 10/16 range, which is 10.0.1.0/24 range. Now right here I'll choose the default route table. We just discussed what route tables do. It has routing rules for routing the packets out of the VCN. And subnet access, I would choose a public subnet because I'm going to create a host in here, compute host instance, and then I'm going to run a web server in it, right? So public is fine. And then down below I'm going to choose a default security list. Security lists are nothing but virtual firewalls which determine what kind of traffic can flow in and out of the subnets and the VCN. For this discussion we have not really gone and discussed what security lists do and what they look like, but for now let's just go and create this particular subnet. So everything looks good. Subnet A, it's a regional, even though it's a multi-AD region, that's fine. The CIDR block, default route table, it's a public subnet, and then there's a default security list. So I click here and I create a subnet. So I just created a simple subnet in a VCN. Now let me go to the compute section of the console and create an instance in this particular subnet. So right here I can see I have one running instance and couple of instances that I have terminated. So I'll create an instance, call it a web server, web. I can choose different operating systems. I'll choose Oracle Linux. I'll choose AD1, so multi-AD region. I'll choose a virtual machine. I could choose a bare metal. We'll talk about all those in the compute module. I'll choose a machine which has one core. And right here, it's asking me to choose the VCN I just created. It's demo VCN, and the subnet we just created was subnet A. So that's all perfect. Now, right below, I could decide not to assign a public IP address. But since it's a web server, I want to SSH into it. I want to install a web server on it, so I am okay with keeping a public IP address. But in many cases, even if it's a web server, you might put it behind a load balancer. You might not need a public IP address, right? So it's just a demo, so I'm going to assign a public IP address here. If you didn't do that, you could come back later and you could assign either an ephemeral or a reserved public IP. You could do that, but I'm going to assign a public IP address here. There are some other options, I'm not going to touch them. And right here I have to paste SSH keys. Now I already have my SSH keys which I'm using, so I just paste in there, and then I can click create here, and now my instance would be created. It would take few seconds and my instance would be up and running. As the instance is coming up, there is one thing which I need to do because it's a web server, and that's creating an internet gateway. Remember we talked about the internet gateway. It takes your traffic in and out of the VCN to the internet, so we need to do that, and then we need to add a rule for all packets to go to the internet gateway. So let me come to the VCN we just created, and first things first, I need to create an internet gateway. You can see there is no internet gateway here, so I click here and I provide a name. I could say it's internet gateway IGW, and there my internet gateway is created. Now if I click on route table, Remember, I'm using a default route table, but there are no rules which are here. So let's go ahead and add a rule here. So first thing it says is what is my target type. Remember, we talked about these four of these gateways: internet gateway, NAT gateway, service gateway, and dynamic routing gateway. We have not talked about local peering and private IP as destination. So let's pick internet gateway as the destination, and then it's saying what kind of packets can go to this internet gateway. So basically I want to route all packets for all IP addresses to this internet gateway. So I would choose this destination CIDR block, and now I would choose the internet gateway I just created. So rather straightforward, really simple, right? So now I've created an internet gateway. I have added the rule for sending all the packets to the internet gateway to this inside this route table, which my subnet is using, right? So hopefully by now my compute instance would be up and running. If I come here, I can see my web server is up and running. It's in the running state, right? And right here I can see it as a public IP address. So I take that public IP address. I'm using Windows subsystem for Linux. It's a Windows 10 machine. You could be running on Linux or Mac, or even on Windows you could use something like Git Bash. So right here I'm going to SSH into this machine, and because it's an Oracle Linux instance, so my username is OPC, and this is the IP address. I just got the public IP address, and right here I'm able to SSH into my instance. Now let's go ahead and create install a web server here, Apache here. It shouldn't take a lot of time. Oops. All right, now another thing which I need to do here is is open the port 80, because I'm going to we install Apache here, so we need to open port 80 on my Linux instance, otherwise it would block the traffic to that port. I would say open port 80, that is TCP. That's great, and then I would just reload it just to make sure. All right, so this part is all done, right? So I installed Apache, I started the server, and then I opened port 80. Now if I use this IP address, the public IP address, I should be able to go into the browser and bring up the web server. Now as I'm doing this, you can see that it says connecting and nothing is happening. There's a spinning wheel here and nothing is happening. So one concept we have not yet talked about is the concept of security list. And as I said earlier, security lists are nothing but virtual firewalls which allow which decide what kind of traffic is allowed in and out of a subnet and a VCN. So for this example here, I was using a default security list. Now if I click on that, and we'll discuss this more in subsequent modules, you can see that it has a bunch of ingress and egress rules. Ingress basically says what kind of traffic is allowed in, and you can see that for all IP addresses, port 22 is open. So from anywhere I can SSH using port 22. And egress, you could see that all kind of traffic is allowed. So for all IP addresses, for all protocols. So by default, all traffic is always allowed from the subnet, but you could decide to disable this rule, right, or delete this rule if you don't want that behavior. Now for ingress, incoming, I see port 22 is open, but other ports are not open. There are a couple of rules for ICMP traffic, so you could ping, etc., but there is no rule for port 80. So let's go ahead and change that. So first thing I do here is CIDR is fine. I want this rule to apply to all IP addresses, and my source can be anything, but my destination is port 80. So this basically says that any kind of traffic coming from anywhere, I don't care, every IP address or any IP address coming from any source port going to port 80 as destination, I want to enable that as incoming. And I could also decide about stateful versus stateless. We'll talk about that subsequently, but right now it's a stateful rule, which means if the traffic is coming in, remembers the state, traffic will always be allowed out from port 80, so I don't have to explicitly open that. So I'll click add ingress rule here, and now you would see that my web server, I could bring it up in my browser, right? I could refresh this, but you could see, and I've changed my home page, etc. But you could see that I'm able to access my web server. So there's a very simple quick demo where we created a VCN, we created a public subnet, we created this compute instance, we installed Apache on it, we created an internet gateway, we also added a rule here using a route table to send traffic from this web server to the internet using the internet gateway. And last thing, which we don't have these on the slide, is we opened the virtual firewall port 80, so the web server could talk to outside to the internet and back. Thank you for watching this demo. This is part 1 of the demo. In part 2, we will make it a little bit more advanced, where we create a bastion host and then we create a private subnet, install a database server, and using a NAT gateway try to get some patches to the database server. Thank you.